So we're live again on Syriana analysis, and today I have a special guest for you, Dr. Can Erimtan. He's an independent historian and geopolitical analyst, and if I'm not mistaken, he's also a self-imposed exile from Turkey. Am I correct, Dr. Can?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you very much for being my guest on Syriana analysis, guys. I will just please go ahead.
No, it's my pleasure because I've been following your program for many years now, and you always do top-notch programming, and your analysis of Turkey is also spot on most of the time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you are knowledgeable and know better the internal, I would say, dynamics in Turkey, which had its reflection on the foreign policy of Turkey in the past decade, at least that what happened in Syria. But before we start our conversation with you, I will just, guys, play 1 minute countdown so that we get more viewers and
Okay,
more people join the video, and then we start asking you the questions. Stay tuned.
let's do it.
So we're back again on Syriana analysis. As the famous saying goes, there are no permanent enemies or permanent friends in politics. And in the past decade or 12 years, we have seen a lot of development in terms of the relationship between Turkey and Syria. And since the start of the so-called revolution in Syria, or if we want to be more scientific or objective, it is a regime change war launched by the United States, and the United States tasked different regional countries to pursue the foreign policy goals of the United States. And since then, there were lots of problems popped up between the Syrian side and the Turkish side. But after 12 years of enmity between especially the leaderships of the both countries, there are attempts from the Turkish side, this time with the mediation of Russia, to restore ties between the both countries. And that's why I hosted Dr. Can Erimtan. He's an independent historian and geopolitical analyst, and also self-imposed exile from Turkey. Dr. Can, I would like to start this conversation with you by just reminding the audience that the special envoy of President Putin paid a visit yesterday to Syria to follow up on the talks between Damascus and Ankara that aim at restoring ties between the neighboring countries. In your opinion, how close the Syrian Turkish side or the both sides are close to strike a deal?
Well, in Turkey, they've been talking about this for quite a few weeks now. I follow the Turkish news via the internet, and lots of Turkish talking heads have been talking about, will Tayyip Erdogan meet Bashar al-Assad? And if he will meet him, when will that be? Will it be soon, or will it be sooner, or will it be later? So they have been talking about that very regularly on Turkish television broadcasts, particularly on the propaganda broadcasts, because as you know, in Turkey, almost all broadcasting agencies are held by government hands, and thus they are nothing but government propaganda. So they do reflect government policy. So it seems to me that the Turkish government is pushing very hard to convince the people that Turkey will need to change its stance regarding Syria in the very near future, and that's why these talking heads have been talking about the possible meeting between Tayyip Erdogan on the one hand and Bashar al-Assad on the other.
Mhm. If an agreement is concluded between, let's say, Turkey and Syria with the mediation of Russia, what would be the main headlines for such an agreement between both sides?
The main headlines, I mean, from the Turkish side, as you, I'm sure, know, previous to the war in Syria, which I like to refer to as Syria's civil war next door to Turkey. So, which was actually, as you pointed out in the beginning of this interview, instigated by the United States with the help of Turkey. They started out from the U.S. Army base, Air Force Army base in Incirlik in Turkey, and from that base they started the war in Syria. But prior to these developments, Bashar al-Assad and Tayyip Erdogan were the best of friends. Erdogan used to visit Damascus quite regularly with his wife, and they met Mr. Assad and Mrs. Assad, and they're very friendly. They were best of pals. And then suddenly, the Obama administration decided that war with Syria was imminent or should be imminent, and Turkey, or rather the Turkish leadership, or to be more precise, Tayyip Erdogan, changed his mind overnight. So from being a good friend, he became a hated enemy. And he talked on television about these beastly things which are being done by Assad, whom he referred to as Assad in Turkish. And so he just completely changed. But now, after 11 years, there is going to be another U-turn, a U-turn back to the good old days, when Tayyip Erdogan and Bashar al-Assad were the best of buddies. So we'll see what will actually happen in actual fact.
Mhm. These talks were seen unrealistic, right, a few years ago. But
Right.
I mean, what has changed in Turkey that Ankara is initiating to restore ties with a government that it sued to overthrow just a few years ago?
Reality has changed, basically. In Turkey, nothing much has changed because the AKP has been in power since 2002, and they have been steadfastly dismantling the so-called secular Republic of Turkey, abolishing the communist principles of political pluralism and replacing it with a one-party state which is ruled and guided by its adherence to religion, to Sunni Islam. But what has changed is the reality on the ground, namely Assad and Putin won, and Erdogan and Obama, now Biden, lost. To put it bluntly, that's what's changed.
So the regime change war has changed, or the regime change war has failed, based.
The regime change, the regime change operation has failed, and that's all.
I think Dr. John is having technical difficulties, but he's back, right?
No,
Yeah,
okay, I'm back now.
yeah,
I had a phone call which I rejected.
no problem. So in the case, one of the problems that popped up in the past years are the Kurdish militias, right, in Syria. So in this case, do you think that both sides will cooperate to end the armed Kurdish presence on the borders?
Well, I mean, that's one of these topics in Turkish politics which never go away. Ever since the PKK started its uprising against the Turkish government in the early 80s, the issue of the so-called Kurdish issue has been a thorn in Turkey's side, primarily originally because of the fact that Turkey is supposed to be a mono-ethnic state where everybody is a Turk. Of course, as you know, the reality on the ground is rather different. Academics muse that Turkey houses about 30 different ethnic groups. So the idea that Turkey is a mono-ethnic state is, of course, bogus. On the other hand, Turkish government policy, Turkish state policy, is adamant about the fact that everybody in Turkey is a Turk. And as a result, the emergence of Kurdish nationalism in the 1980s in the form of the terrorist group PKK is something that the Turkish government could never countenance. The traditional Turkish government under the Kemalist establishment prior to the power of the AKP, and now the AKP has simply wholesale adopted the traditional Turkish stance towards its Kurdish population. Even though I have to say that Tayyip Erdogan and his AKP henchmen, they don't really have a problem with Kurds as such, because for him and for his people, it's not about Turkishness as such. It's about Turkishness in the sense that Turkishness denotes being a Muslim.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of the fact that the majority of the Kurds living in Turkey are Sunni Muslims, Tayyip Erdogan is very happy to open his arms and embrace them, with the exception, of course, of the PKK and their affiliates in Syria, because they are, of course, very adamantly not Muslim. They are self-proclaimed communists back in the olden days, and now they are anarcho-federalists who, of course, do not believe in any kind of God, and definitely not in the Allah that is being promoted by Turkey's Diyanet, or Ministry for Directorate for Religious Affairs.
But should the ordinary Kurds be concerned about a deal between Syria? And we're not talking about the militias now, or just the ordinary Kurds in Syria.
In Syria, the Kurds in Syria should be very concerned about that. The Kurds in Turkey, as I pointed out just a minute ago, Kurds in general in Turkey are generally Sunni Muslims. And as such, there is this fact that not many people know, I think, but there is a great plethora of very small, minute Kurdish parties, which are very staunchly Islamist. Like, for example, there is one party called Hüdapar, which is an abbreviation for some Turkish phrase, but it comes down to Hüdapar, which of course could be understood as meaning Hizbullah, but then in Turkish, Hüda Partisi, Hüda being the name of God. So this Hüdapar is very staunchly Islamist, Sunni Muslim, and they completely support Tayyip Erdogan and his AKP establishment. As a result of which, I do believe that a great many Kurds living in Turkey who do not espouse leftists or communists or anarcho-federalist ideas, but identify rather as Sunni Muslims, they probably vote for Erdogan or for Hüdapar, which in turn then supports the AKP establishment. So, with regards to the Kurds living in Turkey, rapprochement with Syria wouldn't make any difference. On the other hand, the Kurds living in Syria, particularly those Kurds who are now being represented by the PYD and the YPG and the YPG, they will be very unhappy about that, and I imagine, will try anything they can to jeopardize any kind of peace deal between Damascus and Ankara.
Wow. But do you expect a meeting between Assad and Erdogan before the general election this year in Turkey?
I really don't think so, but then again, you never know, because in Turkey things change overnight. But of course, realistically speaking, I do think that we probably have to wait after the election and yes, the full establishment of Erdogan's rule in Turkey, because in my opinion, this year's election is pivotal for Turkey. I think with this year's election, if the AKP were to win, which I think they will, Turkey's identity as a nation state will change completely, which is something I pointed out 10 years ago. I wrote an article back in 2013 in which I put forward that critics of Erdogan and his AKP establishment are afraid of the fact that they are trying to dismantle the Turkish nation state in order to replace it with an Anatolian Federation of Muslim peoples. And like I said earlier, there are about 30 ethnic groups in Turkey, which are all Sunni Muslims, for the most part. Of course, there are also a number of Alevis and Shiites, but they are a very small minority. While the Alevis, they make up about 20%, I believe, but they are still a minority. So the back in 2012, 2013, the AKP issued a program, a manifesto rather, which they called Hedef 2023 or Goal 2023. And in this manifesto, they laid out all kinds of lofty goals for which they were going to achieve within 10 years, mostly to do with economics and ameliorating the fate of Turkish Muslims living in the Republic. But to my mind, this manifesto, Hedef 2023 or Hedef 2023, is nothing but a gateway towards establishing Turkey as an Islamic state, as an Anatolian Federation of Muslim peoples called Turkey. So for that reason, these elections are very, very important, and that's why I don't think that anything that could possibly or potentially upset peace and stability in the region is going to take place prior to the elections. Hence, the meeting, if it comes, it will probably come after the elections.
That's very interesting, because on the Syrian side they say that the meeting could happen before the election, but from the Turkish side, you follow the situation more closely. Guys, I know there is a technical problem from, let's say, an internet site from Dr. Can Erimtan side. However, this interview is being recorded, and I will check the recording now, the quality of the video and the audio, and I will repost it on Syriana analysis, okay? Stay tuned. I will post it tonight again. Dr. Can Erimtan, thank you very much for joining me on Syriana analysis. You're an independent historian and geopolitical analyst, and you are at the moment in self-imposed exile from Turkey.
Well, my pleasure, and I hope to talk to you very soon.
Talk to you soon, Doctor.
Goodbye. Good night.